we're delighted that we have a cell which is really strong in so many core areas, not only of post-war European abstraction, also fantastic American pop art, the School of London artists, as well as a really fantastic selection of younger contemporary artists.
This is Gerhard Richter's Neger Nuba painting from 1964, and it is his first painting where he used color. So it's really a very crucial early painting that set him up for the future of his painting. What also makes it so extraordinary is the scale of it. This is one of the largest photorealist paintings, and there aren't many of them in the early 60s. It's a painting based on a photograph by Leni, Riefenstahl. And Leni went to Africa in 1962 and actually lived with the Nuba tribe in Sudan. And this actual image was in a 1964 magazine called Kristall in Germany, which was very well known at the time. What we're seeing here is actually a funeral ceremony, and the Nuba tribe has covered themselves with white ash, and they're shown in a moment of sort of intense grief, and there was no holding back. He probably was really drawn to it for the compositional aspects and for what it would allow him to do with painting and with color. And when you see this painting, it is just extraordinarily painted. You know, it has that beautiful photorealist aspect to it, but then this blurring device where he takes the brush and he sweeps across, and he almost sort of makes it into a fleeting image rather than something that is sort of held there permanently. And you also have the amazing compositional device of the white margin or band at the top, which clearly references it to being a photograph. To have something like this in this scale, in this quality, is just extraordinary for us. 1961 was the year when Yuri Gagarin first went into space, which has a direct influence of that blue color and seeing the Earth, you know, looming from space in that wonderful vibrant blue. It was also the year that John F. Kennedy was elected president, and tragically the year when also the Berlin Wall was built in Germany. The famous IKB blue, the International Klein Blue, was patented and developed by Yves Klein together with a French chemist called Edouard Adam. Together they identified the special pigment, but also developed a method to keep it in this resin, looking so fresh after all these years, having this wonderful, really velvety, pastely, pigmenty surface, which is so extraordinary. Edouard Adams also gave Yves Klein wonderful sponges that he imported from Tunisia, and early on Klein used these sponges to apply the pigment on the canvas. Once he saw them fully soaked with the pigment, he just fell in love with their extraordinary beauty, and he developed the relief éponge, the sponge reliefs, where the sponges actually became the surface. And suddenly this whole painting is transformed into something that looks at once as if it could come from the bottoms of the ocean, but also from outer space. It's wonderful to have a relief éponge in this scale, and they are by now very rare. And to have a work of this size and this beautiful composition and also condition is truly rare and exciting for us.
I think, as we saw in our New York evening sale, this late series of self-portraits by Andy Warhol has become so iconic. The large 108-inch version, the purple portrait, one of only 5 in existence, sold for $32.5 million. And I think what that shows is that this late series from 1986, the last series of self-portraits that Warhol made before his untimely death, has become a real icon of post-war art. Warhol's known for making self-portraits throughout his career. In the early 60s, he famously made portraits of Marilyn Monroe, Liz, Elvis Presley. And with the first self-portrait that he made in the early 60s, he used his own face and therefore blended the idea of celebrity with self-portraiture. But Warhol was a very shy, quite affected personality. He's always hiding behind an affected persona. Here, ironically, Warhol layers the camouflage imagery that he'd used in earlier paintings with the self-portrait, so that you have this irony of a self-portrait which at the same time is concealing the self. We have 2 very beautiful but very different examples of Gerhard Richter's abstract paintings in the auction. The first is this painting behind me from 1988, and I think what's interesting about this painting is that it really marks the transition in his abstract painting away from the more gestural abstracts that he made throughout the 1970s and early 1980s into this more all-over technique where he pulls a layer of paint across the surface using a squeegee to create a sort of uniformity across the painted surface, which becomes the hallmark of his later 1990s paintings. This comes from a series, a short cycle of 5 paintings in this format. One is in the Kunsthalle in Emden and one is in the Kunsthalle in Hamburg. So I think this is a really rare opportunity to acquire a museum quality abstract painting by the artist. It's interesting when you compare it to the later work from 1997 in the auction, in which he actually uses a different support. So while this is on canvas, the later work is on aluminium. What that means is that the paint takes much longer to dry, and the oils, rather than seeping into the canvas, leave a much more rigid, more sculptural paint surface. For a painting in this scale, it's one of the most complete abstracts that I've seen. Really, really beautiful. One of the highlights of the sale is this fabulous Fine di Dio by Fontana from 1963. Fontana is the leading figure of European abstract art, and it is universally acknowledged that this series, the Fine di Dio, is his greatest achievement in his career. It is incredibly modern. It feels very, very contemporary. When you think back that this was made in 1963, to see this verde mele, apple green colour that he uses is quite astonishing. It's a painting which I think sits just as comfortably alongside other paintings of the period and very contemporary work by artists who are working today. The other exceptional thing is the condition. This is an absolutely immaculate condition throughout, with this beautiful, glossy, lustrous surface which has been preserved beautifully over the years. What I love about this series is you really see Fontana the sculptor in these paintings. We have another work in the Sale Metalli from the year before, 1962, and there again you see in the copper support that he uses the physical scars of the tools that he used. With this series, you really see how he's used his hands to create the work. The imprints of his hands are still left in the ridges of oil paint that are created around these craters, almost a meteoric storm in the canvas.
We're very excited to have this group. It's been put together over the last 15 years by a private collector here in London who has really assiduously gone about trying to get the very best examples by all of the artists that represent this wonderful group, the School of London, which was a term coined by Kittai in 1976 in an exhibition catalogue at the Hayward Gallery. This group is really characterised by different artists, all of whom were born during the interwar years. For so long, these artists have been associated solely with London, but intriguingly and really interestingly, they're finding a much greater audience, I think, internationally, specifically because they stand up with the best of post-war painting, and they're becoming globally sought-after artists. So you have the 1957 painting by Patrick Heron, this wonderful strike painting. You have 2 Kossovs, an early reclining nude from the 1950s, as well as this extraordinary later picture, this scene of King's Cross train station on a March afternoon. Then you have these fantastic examples, 3 Auerbach paintings. Frank Auerbach is a painter who really has a very specific way of painting and really about how he conducts himself as an artist. He's lived in the same studio, worked from the same studio from the mid-1950s onwards, which was Kossov's studio, which he inherited in Camden Town. And he has a kind of really rigorous daily process by which he gets up, goes out walking, whether it's on Primrose Hill or Mornington Crescent, which is obviously really close to where he works in Camden, takes sketches and then immediately goes back to the studio and either sketches again in the studio or starts working on these extraordinary urban landscapes. And the one behind us is this phenomenal Mornington Crescent summer morning painting from 1991. And this is a scene that he's painted repeatedly over the last 30 years. But this particular example not only is impressive because of the enormous scale of the picture, but also the intensity of the colour and this sort of sense of wanting to throw oneself at this kind of extraordinary landscape. It's somewhat apocalyptic in terms of the colour range, and also has this wonderful structure of very, very well built up and defined painterly strokes, all executed in totally different colours. I think Auerbach as a painter, if you think of in the 50s and 60s, with these seemingly quite monochromatic sort of canvases or colours, but here later in his life he's really just allowing his creative energies to completely overflow and really focus on colour and structure. It's a highly successful picture, really wonderful, very compelling image here. Freud emigrated in a way, well, both from Germany as a young child. He was the grandson of Sigmund Freud, and his parents had to bring him away from Nazi Germany. And then again here, he's emigrating from London, if you like, on the eve of the Second World War, and found himself at the time in a small miner's cottage which he rented in North Wales with an old school friend. But this is a picture, if you like, about his memory of London, hence the title Memory of London. And it's really this imaginary scene. He used to spend a great deal of time at that moment when he was living in the city, walking the streets at night. I think he was really drawn to the seediness of London. And already here, when he's 17 years old, he's mapping out some of the absolute critical elements that have come to characterize the rest of his mature body of work. And there's this sense of isolation with this dominant figure that's standing here. And then behind that is this rather kind of illicit sense of hidden sexuality, this sort of couple. Is it a prostitute alluring her next customer, or is it just a couple out in the night? But overall, the sense of this is really another sense of London, this very urban sense, receding here in the background with these kind of cobbled streets and this wonderful sense of recession behind this kind of dominant central figure. Paula Rego is the only female artist that's represented in this body of work, and she was actually born in Portugal and came to London, married the British artist Victor Willing, who sadly died, and she then really threw herself headlong into her art, and she's best known, if you like, for these fantastically powerful, very resolute sort of female figures, often standing like this one in isolation. All the other works here are oil paintings, and Rego actually early in her career did work extensively with oils, but for the early 90s onwards really focused almost entirely on pastel. And in this case it's pastel put directly onto canvas. And there are reports of going to see Paula Rego in her studio at the end of the day when she's been very actively working in pastel. She literally looks like a coal miner. The whole of her face is covered in pastel. She's an artist who keeps a whole group of different props in the studio, so this undergarment would be almost certainly something the artist owns, and very deliberately she writes about this work saying, I wanted to have this particular undergarment on, and it's meant to be both sexually alluring, but at the same time is sort of out of bounds or out of touch. She's an artist who likes to tell stories, and every time you look at the best of her works like this one, you do get a sense of inquisitiveness as to exactly what's going on here. The Kher exhibition, highlighting all of the paintings in the sale on the 28th and 29th of June, will start here at Sotheby's on Friday the 25th of June.